So welcome back. This is our last video on our series with ADHD and executive brain function, and this is where the meat is for the Montessori guides in the classrooms. We'll talk about typical children, what they look like, how to communicate with parents, what to do in the Montessori environment to make accommodations or modifications. And in this part of the video series, we want to look at 2 case studies, because I think a case study gives you that concept of that child over time. So these are children that had been at our school for many years, from the age of 3 till the age of 10, 11, 12. So for a long period of time. So we had the pleasure of having that early intervention in the primary classroom, and then following that child through that experience. So hopefully this will give you some insight and you can visualize a child as we're talking about it. Alicia's going to talk about a little girl that we met when she was 2.5.
She was. We met her when she was 2.5.
And when she came in for her visit to the school, I really sensed very quickly there was something going on with her. And her parents were so lovely. Alicia and I called them back and said, could we spend more time with you to talk to you about your daughter and to give you some impressions and feedback? And they jumped on it.
They did, because it wasn't just attention that was the issue. She was 2, and there was delays in language, there was motor skill delays, so there was some global developmental delays that parents were awesome at. They recognized it, and they said, what do I do? So they went to speech and language therapy, they did occupational therapy, and they did all of these things. So by the time the child entered when she was 4, right? Was it 4?
Yeah.
Well, those early developmental milestones had been remediated to a large extent so that she could enter school, but there was always still this attention, daydreaminess. So by the time she was 7, we were really looking, the teachers were noticing a lot of concentration issues, like she was daydreamy, she couldn't get her work plan done, she was very easily distracted, so she would be talking with her friends over in one area and the teacher would have to consistently keep pulling her back to her work area. She also had that conflict-seeking behavior where socially she was struggling with her peers and, complaining and that they didn't like her and all of those things. And she needed a lot of assistance just getting into a task, right? Yes. To getting started on something. So that's that initiation. So those were all the signs that we saw. And the things that we did within the classroom is we put into place some accommodations, environmental accommodations, work accommodations, where we could provide, the teachers could provide some extended time for certain things. They were able to shorten her work period, so it was shorter concentration tasks and then movement, and some issues with being able to help her, like that developmental delay, more like a primary school student, even though she was in a lower elementary classroom.
She did. She needed a lot of movement. But I think what happened when she moved into the lower elementary classroom is she just had poor concentration. She had difficulty completing a daily work plan that she had set up for herself. She had difficulty initiating tasks. So,
and like many of the students within the lower elementary, they may have had a 5-day work plan. Yes. Well, for this young girl, she needed a morning plan and then she needed an afternoon plan. And that grew to, now we're gonna do a daily plan and now we're gonna do 2 days. Yes. But we had to come really way back to meet her needs.
And it took us a long time. It probably took us 6 months or 8 months to get out of just, Dalal, let's talk about what we're going to do in the morning. Let's map that out. What does that look like for you? Another thing we did on her work lists works, you could call them a work list or a work plan, is allowing her to set a timer so she knew how long things were taking her, because she had a time blindness. So if she started maybe a reading activity, or maybe she started a geometry lesson, or addition with the golden beads, or the stamp game, we would look at a clock and we would write the time she started, and then the time that she completed her 2 problems in math, and they were checked and able to put away. So understanding that she needed more assistance with organization because her frontal lobe was not doing it for her.
And then also from that whole concept of an external demand, you do your math work or your language work, and then you get a preferred activity.
Yes.
So to break up from a non-preferred to a preferred helps with that internal motivation of that carrot. I'll do this, but then I get this.
And a lot of Montessori teachers, a lot of Montessori guides might not know how to implement that in the classroom so it doesn't feel like a big deal, but it really isn't a big deal. It's just giving her the opportunity to say, let's look at your work. These are the works that need to be done this morning, and giving her the opportunity to almost rest in between things.
Yes.
Just to relax and to rest. And she did work up to being able to complete what she needed to do. And what we're really trying to do is follow the child and understand that this child is diagnosed with ADHD and she has difficulties with executive function. Taking all of that into account as we're following the child.
The whole child. It's the Montessori way.
It is.
Yeah.
So the next case study we'll get into is a little boy, and he came into our school at the age of 3. He's a twin, so he has a twin sister. So there was a gender component of a little boy and a little girl, which was really interesting with the parents. But he kind of the signs that we were picking up on, that inability to sit still, the poor concentration, leaving work all around the classroom and not getting anything done. Not being able to attend to a friend talking to him, he would walk away, right? The lack of those social skills. He was easily distracted, so if I were giving him a lesson one-on-one, even if we placed ourselves so we were looking towards the wall, he was distracted by everything else that was going on in the classroom. He was also anxious. He would get nervous. Am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this done? Why doesn't this friend like me? Just this heightened anxiety in completion of work. So it was very challenging to see if he'd mastered the lessons and mastered the material that we've been covering with him. He had poor comprehension, not just of oral tasks, but of written tasks. So if you were to say to him, my friend, let's go to the geography shelf. We'll get the bio map of Asia. You'll also need your colored pencils, and I'll meet you at your workspace. He would be lost in that. And then if he did sit down, he would be daydreaming. He would be not attending to what he needed to do unless you were next to him, kind of physically touching him to redirect him in a kind way. The other piece with this little guy was emotional regulation. He would cry. He would just reach a frustration
Everything was a
point.
big deal.
Yeah, everything was a big deal. He would cry, and the other children in the classroom were very kind and gentle with him, and allowed him to get it out of his system, but then he would feel badly that he cried. I shouldn't be crying. And then he was rigid. He wanted to do things his way, his certain way of doing it. So when we looked at all of these signs and characteristics, there was a lot done for this little guy. So maybe this would be a good time, Alicia, to talk about the kind of assessment that's done in order to diagnose ADHD. So this is what I'm seeing with this child in the classroom, and here are the interventions, but there's this piece in the middle that is the diagnostic piece.
Right. What is it? Or is it multiple things? So when we see that it's bigger than just what we're doing or what we can do within a classroom, we refer. And that referral may be to a medical doctor, it may be to a psychologist for some more specialized assessment. Now, when we do assessments for ADHD, we're measuring the 5 areas of attention using neuropsych assessments. We're measuring how well they can sustain attention, or what is their attentional capacity, and then we're comparing their performance against other children their age to see, is there a significant delay? And then based on that, we then send them to the medical doctor. The medical doctor has to rule out other things like a sleep disorder or like thyroid conditions, which could look very similar to an attention deficit disorder. So it's typically then lab work is done, and then the medical doctor will talk about medical interventions, so pharmacology, medications, and how that works within the brain, which we'll talk about later.
So this little guy was prescribed medication, and he was treated by his pediatrician over
Whereas
time.
the little girl wasn't.
Right?
So medication doesn't always have to occur, even though it is a neurochemical problem. He was one of the kids who it really was needed.
Because again, he was impaired in all areas of his life. Mom and dad and his siblings were having such a challenging time at home. He was having a challenging time at school, at soccer practice. It was really impacting his whole little world. So the other thing that we did is we provided a space in the classroom and in the outside place for self-regulation. So when he felt like he was really going to lose it because his frustration level was so high, the teacher gently would say, would you like to go outside and let's take some deep breaths?
And there was like a little sensory area.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that really worked for him. He also, his medication that he took in the morning was most effective in the morning. So it had like a 3-hour to a 4-hour window of time. So that's when he did his work with deep concentration.
Yes.
That's when he was able to really focus and feel good and move through his tasks, through his work list, which allowed him in the afternoon to relax.
Absolutely.
Because it's stressful for these little guys.
And do more preferred tasks.
Yes. He would draw, and he would go outside and bird watch, and he was interested in music. So there were other areas for him to explore in the classroom. We didn't expect that he would be as attentive as he was in the morning. So capitalizing on the timing is important for a child that is taking medication. Some other things done in the classroom is that he had extended time to complete things. So if I were giving a small group lesson on nouns, and the other children could leave when they were done, I would know in my mind in the classroom that he would need another 5 to 10 minutes. So I didn't plan my next lesson right away. I always kept that in mind, that he needed extended time.
And I think that there's a difference between, just giving students extended time with ADHD, because they have a hard time paying attention, right?
They do.
So you don't want to just give them extended time. You want to give them extended time, so break tasks down for them so that there's focused time to work, and then there's movement, and focused time to work, and then there's movement, which will take more time.
Yes. So with that, his work was chunked out.
Yep.
The expectation was shorter. So if he were in second grade and we were leaving a lesson, the expectation might be for the other second graders to write 4 sentences using verbs and nouns and adjectives, where he might just have to write 2. And then providing additional assistance with phonological awareness and reading comprehension. Those were all components that we put into place with this little guy.
And that was more not just because of the ADHD, but there was some speech issues too.
There absolutely
Which was causing some weaknesses in early reading development.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what do we do when there are signs? So again, we go back to the observation component in the Montessori classroom. So your role is to observe, well, to be taking notes, to doing on-task, off-tasks, Checklists, you can find those online. Just look it up, on task, off task checklists. You want to then be engaging in very loving conversations with the parents. The sooner you're able to really develop an emotional bond with the parents, the more you'll be able to assist the child. So you are chatting with the parents, you're asking to sit and for them to come into the classroom. You're creating an emotionally safe space when the families come into the classroom. Yeah. It's not judgmental. So those are all the kinds of things you're doing to get the information of this is what I'm observing to the parents. And then you and either your assistant or your para teacher in the classroom, this is what you're talking about after school or in the morning when you're setting up the classroom. And you want to check that you're both seeing the same thing. Are you seeing this? I'm seeing this. Did you see this today? I saw this today. Because you want to have a mirror to make sure what you're seeing is accurate.
Yep, and that you're able to say, well, in the afternoon, this child really struggles to do concentration tasks. So let's kind of accommodate where they are in the classroom. Let's accommodate what they're doing in the classroom and modifying not the expectation of the content, but accommodating so that they can show what they know.
So you're going to trust the environment, you're going to help the child with organizational systems, visual organizers really help them, allowing them to sit in an area of the classroom that they'll be most successful in talking with them and conferencing and trying to figure that out.
And that may not be putting them in a corner, because if they're inattentive, they'll get nothing done. It may be right next to you as you are teaching so that you can go, okay, go to this note.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And coming up with a way that you're doing that with the child that's respectful.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So with one of the children in the class, just a little thumbs up when they would see the little thumbs up. Oh, I need to get back to what I was doing. Mm-hmm. Timers are helpful in the classroom, giving them breaks, like Alicia and I were saying, with preferred activities, reducing the quantity of the work. Another great accommodation are just headphones that block out the sound in the classroom.
Noise canceling headphones can, in a Montessori classroom, can really do wonders for many students, but definitely students with ADHD, because they do have a hard time with that filter.
And just having the headphones available in the classroom that all the children could use them, Absolutely. That it's not just the ADHD child or children. Another thing that tended to help my son was a vest, something that's weighted. He could wear it, would like ground him, or he would carry heavy things and that would ground him. Maintaining a schedule, all those things you're doing in the classroom, these are just things to add in.
And creating a circle of friends.
Yes.
So because students with ADHD may really have difficulties with socialization and they may have more conflicts, to be able to connect them with peers so that there's a peer there that's there to support them, that will help them feel more successful in that environment, I think is really important, because they don't feel good about themselves.
No, and having that three-year age span. So when my son was in lower elementary, he was in 3rd grade, there was this little guy who came in to 1st grade, and he was ADHD, and he was unregulated and all over the place. And so he had Aiden. Yes. And Aiden could help him. So having that peer relationship that's non-judgmental is going to help them.
And being able to be the leader too, yes. That they're not always being helped, but they can help because they lived it. Aiden lived it. So he knew what this little one might need.
Yes, right? Just like we do with dyslexic children or children that have other kinds of concerns. So the Montessori classroom, we know, is beautifully equipped. It's beautifully arranged. Just be thinking of quiet places within the classroom for the children to learn in.
And there's also different lesson presentations that you can do too. So more interactive lesson learning, interactive activities may be more conducive to that child, especially if it helps helps with respiration and blood flow and all of those things to get that neurochemical absorption so that they can pay attention instead of sitting for long periods of time. So opportunities to move. Having smaller groups may be more effective than having a large classroom discussion, because then the teacher can really notice when that child is on task and doing what they need to do, instead of a larger group setting where they're only noticing what they're not doing. Get back on task, get back on task. Versus, wow, you did that, great, now do that. The more that you can notice what they are doing, the more they will do it. And then pairing them up with peers, because they do want to be social. So if they can't complete a full task on their own, then we're going to pair you two together and you're going to both do it together. May be really helpful.
So then our next area is just an example of just if you have them recording in their notebooks, or they have material that they need to do, making sure that you're breaking down the assignment, that they're doing enough to show mastery but not overkill.
That's right. Like, this is just an example of a math page. If you put that math page in front of a child with ADHD, they're going to may go, oh my gosh, that'll take me all day long, because they have that time blindness. They don't know how long something's going to take. So if you just could cut that and say, do these 10, here's your paper instead of here's your paper, and they show mastery, great, move on, you're good.
Right. Increasing the font size also helps them just stay engaged.
It's less distracting on a page. There's less stimulus on a page.
And then the next page is on organization. So taking apart a work in the classroom, taking apart a project, and allowing them to draw, to write, so you can map out the project.
And we would even, like within the classroom, even the organization on their mat, on their work mat, so that things weren't just all over the place, to even say, okay, here's a picture of what your mat should look like. So match that picture. Your materials go here, your paper goes here, your pencil goes here, because they may not have that image in their mind, right? Or may not have that organizational system yet. So they need something to match it to each time. And they may need it for months to have that picture there, but to help them with that organization. The other piece that, like, sometimes you'll do when you're writing, you'll do webs. Well, that's a very disorganized way to write. And for some artistic students, or students who are really good at writing, a web graphic organizer works really well. But for someone with ADHD who has trouble with organization and planning, they may need something that's more linear, like on the screen, where it's step 1, step 2, step 3, because they don't have that internal structure.
And that might just be for a work in the classroom. That might be for one work. They might need that much support. But what we always talk about with teachers and parents is, you put the support in for as long as they need it, and then they learn the skill, and then you bring it away.
Out. Yes,
so
slowly.
Slowly. But it's not something they'll need forever, but that does help. So these are some things that we've done successfully as well. Just really being positive and empathetic and kind and loving.
The concept of time, because of the time blindness, is really hard for them. And so being able to pull in technology and tools, cool tools, to be able to help them learn what the feeling of time. How long is 5 minutes? How long does that feel? And so that may be a timer. That may be a clock that you draw 5 minutes on, and then you monitor, oh, how long did that take? Well, you thought it was going to take 30 minutes, but it actually took 10. You know, helps them have that visual cue to understand the feeling of time.
The other part we're on now are peer relationships. So when you're looking at these children that have ADHD, they're 30% less mature than other children. So as my son was growing up, I just subtracted 3 years. So that just helped me put it in context what he was able to do from a social relationship, and also who he enjoyed playing with typically were younger children, not older children.
So giving him the gift of time.
Yes.
You chose to give him the gift of time and keep him back so that he was playing with the children and had his peer group that may be a year or two younger. And within the Montessori environment, that 3-year span is so valuable because you can take into account how much time they're going to need to just grow and mature.
And if we keep in context that maybe by the age of 10, some of that will start to come together for them, that might be a magic time frame you're looking at. So peer relationships, talking with families about peer relationships. So the next one is when the Montessori environment isn't enough for a child with ADHD. And not that you're asking the child to leave the school or leave your classroom, but you're really looking at how is this working?
I need some more help.
Yes.
As a teacher.
Yes. And it's okay to say you need more help because you don't have a lifetime of teaching and you don't have a PhD in neuro brain development. So it's okay to say, you know, I've looked at the on task, off task, I've done my observations, I've looked at work completion, I've done work sampling, I've talked to the parents about what I'm seeing, what I'm observing, I'm asking for input at home, and now I really do need to have the lead teacher in my division, I need to have the guidance counselor come in and help me navigate this so that the parents can be assisted in ruling in and ruling out what's going on.
Right. And ADHD does tend to be the most effective treatment for it does tend to be a 3-pronged approach. So you have education of yourself as a professional of what ADHD is, which you're doing now. You have education of the parents and the school community and understanding ADHD and this child and the development that they're at. You also have accommodations, things that you've put into place within your classroom to really help this student succeed. And the third component is some sort of maybe medical or alternative intervention that's going to help with that neurochemical piece of ADHD. So sometimes you need all 3, sometimes you need 2. It depends on that individual child and the severity of the disorder. So there's a lot of empirically proven ways to deal with and treat ADHD. Pharmacology has been around for a long time, medication since the 30s. And then again, the education of the disorder, parent training. We did a lot of parent training too, so that parents understand, because it is a genetic condition. So if a father or a mother has ADHD, they need to understand themselves so that they can better help their child. And also some support groups so that a student doesn't feel like they're alone in this, in their ADHD, and that there's real gifts associated with it that other people can't do, but they can do. So that support network is really important too. And then the accommodations that we've been talking about. So let's talk a little bit about psychopharmacology and how it works, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about medication and ADHD. When you look at the most typical medications that are usually initiated with ADHD, it's a stimulant medication. So what it does is it actually, I'm going to show you, what it does is the medications actually help with the absorption of dopamine, norepinephrine from neuron to neuron. And the medications may work a little differently. Some may take these little vacuums, these receptors, and they may stop some of them. and some they may open up more so that the neurochemical can get from neuron to neuron through this synapse.
So in addition to medication, which kind of changes the neurochemistry to help with absorption of the right neurochemicals within the brain, there's other ways to deal with ADHD that are more natural ways. One of them is just good diet. Our brain runs on glucose, and so food feeds our brain that glucose. And when individuals have a good, higher protein, lower simple carbohydrate diet, then the neurochemistry works better. High omega 3 fatty acids is very good with neural transmission. Protein actually helps with absorption over a longer period of time, so there's not a lot of glucose spikes. In addition to diet, higher intense aerobic exercise is very helpful too, because that gets our blood flowing, the oxygenation of the blood that goes to our brain, and then that helps with absorption of neurochemicals. There's several studies that are coming out now regarding yoga and meditation and helping individuals learn how to breathe and clear their mind, and helps with sustained focus and reducing hyperactivity. And then there's also another modality called neurofeedback. And neurofeedback is kind of a brain training technique where it uses EEG, and the equipment actually reinforces the individual's brain waves to be able to sustain focus, inhibit impulses. And in another session that we have on anxiety, we'll talk a little bit more about neurofeedback, and you'll actually be able to see it. So those are just some other interventions that can be done in addition to or in lieu of medication. So on this next slide, this is a picture of actually that same brain that we looked at before, but on medication. So if you remember, the previous slide had very large holes in the frontal lobe, which showed that there was a lack of absorption of neurochemicals, which control things like sustaining focus and inhibiting impulses and executive functions. Well, this brain has a stimulant medication, and you can see that those holes are smaller. It's not a magic bullet, but this brain is working much better because the absorption of the neurochemicals is happening at a much faster rate. So even though it's not perfect like the initial brain that didn't have ADHD, this is the brain on medication, and it's working more effectively.
So I have a good example, and then we'll finish up with the resources. I had a little guy, Zachary, who was in 3rd grade with me, and he was really struggling and spending time with mom and dad in a very loving way, trying to assist him. Alicia did the assessments and the medical doctors, and he was placed on medication. And he came into my classroom Monday morning, and he said, "Mrs. Lindo, it's so exciting. I feel so good." I said, "Well, can you describe how it feels?" And he said, "Well, it used to be like when you go into Best Buy and all the TVs are on volume 20, and I'm trying to figure out what I need to be doing. Now I know what TV to pay attention to."
Yes.
So
yes.
It can be impactful, but his parents were also doing social skills with him and emotional regulation. So Alicia and I have listed some resources for you. One is CHAD, which is a parent organization.
And wonderful articles and research studies on ADHD and ways to assist students and adults.
Yes, and it also to be your cheerleader, to encourage you. Another book on learning disabilities and ADHD, because sometimes things come together. ADHD 2.0 by Edward Hollowell,
Dr.
which
Hallowell's
is my favorite.
A wonderful speaker.
Yes.
If you ever get an opportunity to listen to him on YouTube or something, he's a wonderful speaker.
Answers to